thing that pops up that says you're muted now. At the start of every class, I always press mute all. That way, anybody who's coming into class maybe a little bit late, their doorbell doesn't chime and we don't hear any feedback and stuff like that. But as always, Chef Jeannie will open up the floor for questions and comments throughout class, and you can unmute yourself then.
Yes, that's right. Don't feel personally offended when we mute you. Everybody gets muted. Sometimes I even get muted. Nobody wants to listen to me. Anyway, class has begun. It is BK121. I'm Chef Jeannie Stevenson here with Chef Genevieve as my co-host and evaluator. So welcome to class, everybody. Thanks for coming. I just want to shout out real quick to thank everybody who came to the extra session last week. We're going to have the next extra session on Friday at 7:30 p.m. Central Time, and I will send out a link to that. If you want to come and talk more about cake. Cake is my favorite thing to talk about, and I could talk all day about it, so that's a really fun session to be in. Anyway, welcome to class. Thanks for coming. I got a lot of messages over the past several days that lead me to believe that some people don't watch the live session all the way through, or if they're watching the archive. I just want to remind everybody that that is a requirement of the class to watch the live session, whether it's in the live session or in the archive. Yeah, some of the questions I got were like things that we really, really hammered home during the lecture. So, you know, I kind of got to thinking, no, these people aren't watching the video. You need to do that. And you're going to be a lot more successful in class if you actually watch it. So please do that. Okay. This week we are going to be talking about two-stage method cakes and mousse and patibomb and enrobing a cake with glaze, which is a lot of information. So I'm going to try to get through it. We've got about 45 minutes because at the end of class we've got Chef Gina Donovan, who is going to join us to speak about externships. She is your resident externship expert. She is the chef externship coordinator. So she's going to be joining us about 45 minutes into class, and then she will hang out for a little while after class is over to answer any more questions that anybody has about the externship. Okay. So just to kind of touch on that real quick before we get started, that class begins directly after BK 121. So you all should be shopping for your externships now. Make sure you get a site located where you want to do your externship. It's got to be a job in the baking industry. You can't be a dishwasher or a server or anything like that. You've got to have a 2.0 cumulative GPA upon completion of all these classes in order to be able to go on your externship. It's a 6-week course. It's 150 hours minimum of work time in the industry. And like I said before, it's got to be in some kind of commercial kitchen, bakery, restaurant. You cannot work for yourself. Like if you sell cakes from home, you cannot work from your house. You can't work for a relative. The class page has a fact sheet on externships, which I'll show you later. So you just want to make sure that you know all the information before you sign up for something that might not be approved. Okay. Any questions about that before we move on? Okay. Before we move into our topic this week, we're going to recap on week 1. Like Chef Genevieve was saying just a little while ago, we were super, super impressed by a lot of the assignments that came in, a lot of beautiful cakes, flat icing, beautiful layers. The piping was good. Some not so good, but there's only, room to move up from there. So it was a brand new challenge for a lot of people. We've got a wide range of abilities in this class, some amateurs, some people who are almost professional. I know that a lot of you struggled with the buttercream portion. I spent many, many hours talking to students about buttercream on like Friday and Saturday nights. I think the biggest problem that you had there was either overcooking or undercooking your sugar solution. Some people said that their cakes tended to be a little bit dry, which creaming method cakes are a little bit drier than cakes that are based on like oils. But I baked my cake, and I'm going to show you some pictures maybe after Chef talks about the assignments. But I thought the cake turned out really nice. It was kind of like pound cake, but not quite as dense. It was a nice white color. It didn't really rise a lot. I know a bunch of people said their cakes didn't rise a lot, and it doesn't. It just rises a little bit. I had 16 ounces in each of my pans, and that was a perfect amount for one layer. So in the future, when I make this recipe, I'll probably double it. I made an 8-inch cake, so I would get like 4 layers instead of 2 layers. But of course, you could make a smaller cake and like a 6-inch cake, get 2 layers instead of 2 layers. So I'll hand it over to Chef, and she can talk about the assignment, what she saw, and then we can talk about that a little bit more, and then move into 2-stage and mousse cakes.
So to reiterate what Chef said, I saw a ton of beautiful cakes this week, definitely ranging in skill, but something that I saw in every single assignment was a specific detail about something that you learned. So even the people who are a bit more comfortable with icing mentioned that maybe they hadn't worked with Italian buttercream specifically, or maybe the process of piping the border was different than before. But I felt like everyone from every assignment that I saw felt like they learned something, and that's what's always most important to me. So awesome job there. The next thing I want to say is I want you guys to be more confident in yourselves. I saw some incredible work this week, and I'm not joking you. Work that made me go, whoa, I got to step up my cake game. This is beautiful. And then in the narratives, I saw like, I don't think this was good enough. I didn't feel prepared. And that's okay to feel that way. I don't want you guys to not be honest about your feelings, but I also want you to be proud of yourselves and take pride in the fact that you're here at school to learn. I'm not looking for perfectionism. And I have to tell you guys, the number of cakes that I saw where the narrative was like, this was my first ever cake, way better than my first ever cake, way better than my first ever 10 cakes, okay? This takes practice. It's not something that you can do magically overnight. So that being said, when it comes to practicing your piping, which was the thing I saw that most people really wanted to continue to do after this assignment, they were like, I liked my border, but I felt like it could be better. You can make, I like to call it a dummy icing, but it's Crisco, it's shortening and powdered sugar. Now, this is not to feed people. This is not a delicious frosting, but it is a very similar consistency. So to practice piping, that's an inexpensive way to make some frosting, and you can practice on parchment paper, scoop it back up into your bowl and keep reusing it. So that's something to keep in mind if you want to keep practicing that. Not only to get better at your borders, but to keep learning designs. There are books about the number of border designs that there are. There are so many different ways to do it. So the more that you can learn, the better. Really, you guys, you set the bar high for yourselves though, week 1. So I'm expecting to see some beautiful work week 2. I'm going to expect it every week now that I know what you guys are capable of. My goodness. The one thing that I want to show you guys is our class cafe. So I've reached out to a few of you. Once I'm finished grading, I'm going to reach out to a few more of you to ask you permission to share a picture of your work in our class cafe. But also, I don't want you guys to necessarily wait for me to reach out to you. I want you guys to start this discussion every week. So in our class cafe, which you can find towards the top of our page, I've already started the thread, share your week 1 cakes. So you can get in here, reply, share a picture of your cake. It's absolutely not required. It's not like a discussion forum. It's not like a knowledge check or anything like that. Just for fun, if you were really proud of your cake, or maybe if you just want to ask for suggestions, if you felt like your classmate might have some good ideas for you. Share in that thread, and I hope that that's something we can keep doing, because I love getting to learn from each other. I definitely learned some new things from you guys grading your assignments this week.
Yeah, awesome. I definitely want you to use that class cafe too. I was surprised to go in there yesterday and find that nobody had posted. I think I saw one post in my other class, but nobody's used the class cafe so far, and that was disappointing to me. But you
did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I did.
Yesterday when I looked, there was only one person. I don't think it was you, but maybe I missed it.
No, I didn't answer back to her.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to see your work in there. And even if you just want to talk to each other about other things that are cake related, you can do that, but utilize the class cafe. I'm going to show you my cake real quick. And I will disclose that I forgot to take pictures of like the first 5 steps of the cake process, just because I'm not used to taking pictures while I'm baking, working at campus level, but I eventually remembered to start doing it. But you see in this pan right here, this parchment paper, this goes a little bit too far up the side of the pan. Like I put my paper in there and I was like, oops, it's not okay to bake a cake like this because that's gonna mess up the edges of your cake, especially if you're trying to make a cake super straight and whatnot and it's not all wonky. So if you get paper that looks like it's going up the side of the pan, take it out and trim it down a little bit. I scaled my cake. So I took the recipe and I added up all the ingredients and figured out how much it weighed and then basically divided it into 2 because I was going to use 2 pans. You don't want to eyeball it. So definitely scale the cake. I had one that was like 16.23 and the other one I think was 16.30 ounces. And that's pretty much the same thing. It's just a couple grams difference. It's not that big of a deal. I clean the bowl out completely. Don't ever leave anything in the bowl. When you go to work at a bakery or a restaurant, that's a fireable offense if you don't get all the, because that's money right there. So make sure you scrape it out completely. These are my cakes after they baked. They didn't rise up too much, but they tasted really good. It was a nice fluffy texture. This isn't the best picture, but it had a nice small crumb. I didn't have a lot of tunnels. I had a couple air bubbles, but I didn't have like a lot of tunneling. And it was like pound cake.
I wanted to point out about this picture that I think is awesome. Almost 0 signs of tunneling. And that is something I saw in a few of our cakes, mostly towards the top. I saw when we trimmed off the mound at the top, I saw a fair amount of tunneling. That can definitely happen when you pour batter into your pan. Air bubbles can start rising to the top. You can shake your cake pans a little bit. You can even lightly tap them on your counter to help bring some of those air bubbles to the top to pop them before going into the oven.
One of my favorite things to do too when I'm putting batter in a pan, after I kind of bang it on the table a little bit, I twist it real fast, like I'm spinning a top, and that causes centrifugal force to kind of push the batter across the pan. Like if you were spreading it out with a spatula and it was kind of uneven, you want to shake it a little bit, you want to bang it on the tabletop, and then like spin it on the countertop, and it's going to go around and around, and that's going to create a more even layer. You don't want to do that too much because then all of a sudden the batter is going to start going up the sides of the pan. But if you do it a couple times just to kind of even the cake batter out a little bit, that works really well. So anyway, what was I going to say? Yeah, they looked really good. I had some questions about butter versus shortening. So if anybody wants to ever substitute butter for shortening, if you go to page 378 in your textbook, I'm going to share it for you. On page 378, there's some calculations on how to substitute butter for shortening or vice versa. You don't want to use just equal weight for equal weight because butter is 80% fat and 20% water versus shortening, which is 100% fat, not including the air that's whipped into it. But this is a good resource to know about if you're making something, anything really. It doesn't have to be a cake, but if you want to substitute the butter for shortening, if you're strapped for cash and you can only afford the shortening, or if you're, if it calls for shortening like our next recipe does and you'd rather use butter, I don't recommend for a 2-stage method cake, but if you want to do that, you can. Okay. The Italian buttercream too, a lot of people had problems with that, but if you cook your sugar accurately and you dump it into the meringue, you let it whip until it's thick and the bowl is cool, and then you add your room temperature butter, you should have no problems. A lot of times I get students who are like, I did it exactly the way you said or exactly the way the video and it still got messed up. Well, I don't mean to be rude, but if you did it exactly the way you're supposed to, then it would have turned out exactly the way it was supposed to turn out. So something went wrong. Maybe your bowl wasn't clean when you were making the meringue and it didn't get a chance to whip up because maybe there was fat in the bowl, which can happen when you're making meringue. Maybe you cooked your sugar too hot and you poured it into your egg whites and you got lumps of cooked egg whites. First ever time I made Italian meringue, I had no idea what I was doing. I just cooked some sugar and dumped it in there. I made my buttercream and I came back the next day to use it, and I was like, who put coconut flakes in my buttercream? Like, which one of you guys added coconut to my, this is not coconut buttercream, but it wasn't coconut flakes, it was cooked pieces of egg whites because I didn't do it right because I'm dumb. But now I know.
I think Rachel has a question for us.
Go for it.
Sorry to interrupt, but so my buttercream was fine. I didn't have any problems with the procedure, but is that really how Italian buttercream tastes? Like any other, is it similar? Because like I looked at other recipes and the butter percentage was like 25% higher than most other ones I looked at and compared to. That, I mean, that frosting, like to me, it just tastes like whipped butter with, and at the very end, you got a little bit of sweetness.
Yeah.
But I just felt it was just like really greasy and buttery.
Yeah.
What is y'all's experience with that?
Classically, meringue style buttercreams are very, very buttery, and a lot of people aren't used to it. I'll tell you that I worked at a bakery in Chicago called the Goddess and Grocer that was run by an Australian lady, and she wanted everything to be made fresh from scratch. And she's like, make your best buttercream recipe. I made Swiss buttercream, and she's like, that's not buttercream. It doesn't taste like buttercream. Turns out she wanted it to taste like the grocery store stuff. So a lot of people just aren't used to that type of flavor. So you have to kind of know your clientele, and you know, if you're serving a particular type of cake, you got to let them know, like, this is the type of icing I serve. Do you like that sort of thing? And if not, maybe you make a American buttercream instead. And I'll kind of give you my little secret because I'm not in business right now, but I like to mix the two together. There goes my black curtain again. I like to mix the two together. I make a meringue style buttercream like Swiss or Italian, and I make American buttercream, and I 50-50 it. So you've got that light, fluffy, buttery quality of the meringue, and then you've got that sugary, almost fake flavor of the American that people are used to. And it creates this icing that like nobody else has ever had before because it's different. It's two different types, two different varieties of icing mixed together. And that was my secret when I worked at the Goddess and Grocer, was that I mixed the two together and I created something that had the texture and consistency and the buttery flavor that I was looking for. And I also had that familiar, a little bit of that familiar flavor that a lot of the older customers were looking for, especially. And I will say, I think I mentioned the other day that if you mix American buttercream into your meringue style buttercream, it helps the food coloring stick better. It does. I don't know why, it just does. But if you don't want to make American buttercream, you can always add a little bit of powdered sugar to your Italian or Swiss buttercream at the end to give it some more sweetness and put a little bit more of like a sugary texture in there, which a lot of customers might be looking for as well.
And to Chef's point, every single bakery that I've worked at, the head chef has had a buttercream that was their own. Came from these techniques in origin, but just like Chef did at that bakery, tweaked it to fit her audience, to fit what her boss's needs and the community's needs. So that's something to keep in mind, is that even out there in the professional world, you're going to come across plenty more varieties of buttercream.
Yep, know your audience and know what they want to eat, and just try not to be too pretentious and be like, oh, the only thing I serve is Italian buttercream, so you're going to have to get used to it. Like, no, well, if you're paying me, I'll make whatever you want. Make whatever you want me to serve. I'm going to jump right into week 2 because we've got a lot to talk about before Chef Gina Donovan comes in. I'm going to start screen sharing. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? Yeah. All right. Well, what are we talking about? Week 2. Week 2, you are making a 2-stage method cake, which is kind of like the creaming method, except you're actually creaming the fat with the dry ingredients first. I had some pictures of what your assignment's going to look like. You're going to have a chocolate cake. with mousse filling, and it's going to be enrobed in something like ganache or mirror glaze, which we will chat more about. It could be colorful mirror glaze, like this one here. It could be a chocolate ganache. The cake is going to be full of mousse, so you're going to have 2 layers of cake and a layer of mousse. Now, you might not have a layer of mousse that's this thick on the outside, but you definitely want to at least crumb coat the cake with some mousse, just like you are crumb coating it with buttercream, because when you're glazing a cake and it's not crumb coated with anything, the glaze will tend to soak into the cake, and then you're not going to get a nice smooth finish. It's going to almost like absorb into the cake as if it was some kind of soaking liquid. So you need to crumb coat it with a little bit of the mousse. Okay, so let's talk about your assignment. Where is it? Here it is. Self-identification photo, as usual. Take a picture of your bottom half and your top half with like a note that has the date on it. Sanitizer strip, mise en place, of course. All your ingredients sifted into the bowl. First addition of your milk, you're going to break up the liquids into 2 portions with the eggs. Batter scaled into pans, finished cake, the cake after you take it out of the pan and cut it into your layers. If you don't want to cut it into layers, you can bake it into 2 pans, but I will say that when you do that, you end up with more cake waste because each pan is going to have a dome that you need to slice off, versus if you just bake it in 1 pan, you only have 1 dome. So just think about that in terms of cake waste.
Several of you also mentioned that trimming the cake was a challenge for you this week. Something that helps me, and it's personal preference, is to let my cakes cool completely. You should be doing that anyways. But then I chill my cakes overnight. I put them in the fridge and let them get super, super cold and hard, or even the freezer. And again, that's not everyone's practice. There are some pastry chefs who do not put their cakes into the freezer. But when my layers are colder, I have an easier time trimming them. They're a bit more solid and it's a little bit easier to maneuver them.
Yeah, I definitely recommend that for, if you're not used to doing that. And in the industry, we will usually pull them out of the freezer because we store, if we're baking 100 cakes, we're not going to store them at room temperature. We'll put them in the freezer, but you pull them out and you slice them when they're thawing a little bit. It's a lot easier to work with. And then, of course, when you put your filling in there, the filling gets cold and the crumb coat goes on a lot easier and it chills up faster. So that is a good point. Your mousse. This is something that we're going to try to talk a lot about, and especially in the extra session. You have several steps. You've got chocolate melted with cream. You've got cream whipped to soft peaks. Then you're going to take some eggs and sugar and put them in a bowl over some hot water and mix them up until they reach 240 degrees. Then you're going to put them in a mixer and whip them until they've doubled or tripled in volume. That's called a pat a bomb. That's what this term is right here. You're going to fold your melted chocolate into the pat a bomb. Then you're going to fold the whipped cream in there, and then you'll have chocolate mousse, in which case you will then put it inside your cake. So we want to see the assembly of the cake too. And just like I said before, there should be 2 layers of cake with a thick layer of mousse in between. And then you want a thin layer of mousse covering the cake, like a crumb coat. You can make it a little bit thicker if you want to, like an icing, but it needs to be super flat and even. That way you can get your glaze on there in a nice even coat. There should not be any bumps or anything. So crumb coat might be easier to achieve that. And then put it in the freezer so it's frozen and ready to glaze. And then, of course, there's another recipe. So you got 3 recipes this week. And I want to just throw out there, too, that if you don't want to make the mirror glaze, which is a little bit more complicated than ganache, you can make ganache. First, I'm going to explain the mirror glaze. It's gelatin-based. So we're going to want to see the gelatin mixed with the water, which should look like applesauce. You're going to put all your liquids in the pot and heat them up. You will dump it over your chocolate like you're making a ganache. You're going to add the gelatin, and actually in the step before that, and then you're going to use your glaze when it's cooled to about 90 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Then you will use it to glaze over the cake. So you want to take pictures of all that. Now I will throw out there that, one second, that mirror glaze is kind of hard to work with because it's gelatin based and it sets up really fast and you don't really have a lot of room for air. So I did say here that you can use a basic ganache, which I added on the class page under the assignment section in case you want to do that instead. But the same rule applies, is that you've got to mix it all together until it's smooth. You've got to cool it down to 90 to 95 degrees, and then it's ready to use. Okay, go for it.
I just want to clarify the key steps for the ganache process, if you choose ganache, that I want to see in your required photos. So for ganache, the key steps to me that I need to see is your cream heating on the stovetop, being scalded on the stovetop, your cream poured over your chocolate, and then once you've mixed everything together and it's smoothed out. So those are the 3 photos that I want to see if you go the ganache route for your sauce. Something else that I really recommend to you guys, I don't know if you noticed, but there are a lot of required photos this week. So something that's helpful to me and also helpful to you is to number your photos. So as you're looking through your required photos, you can see that 1 is mise en place. So you're going to label your mise en place photo 1. And then let's say number 7 is showing us your finished baked layers trimmed. You're going to put number 7 on that picture in your folder. That's not required, but I'm giving you that suggestion because the required photos are worth points. So if we're missing those photos, we might lose out on some points. And that's one way to make sure that you're cross-checking them.
Good. Back to the ganache real quick. It is important that you mix it the right way, just like Chef said. You want to bring your cream almost up to a boil. Dump it over the chocolate. Do not put the chocolate in the pot. And the reason why is because when you add the chocolate to the pot, a lot of times it has the tendency to scorch the chocolate because it's just so hot in there. So put your chocolate in a bowl, dump the hot cream over the chocolate, and then use a whisk to whisk it up until it's smooth. Whisk it up until it's as smooth as possible. Don't incorporate air bubbles into it. Don't be like beating it like you're making a whipped cream or meringue. Just use the whisk and stir it gently until it's smooth. And if you do have any lumps, which you really shouldn't if you did it right, but if you do, you can pour it through a sieve and get the lumps out. You should always do that when you're making sauces, just in case there's a lump. It's pretty much an industry standard to strain your sauces.
I have a question about the first picture.
Okay.
I know. What did you say about the date and the uniform? Like, I didn't get that. Like, I don't understand that. I never heard that.
Sure. So all you have to do is hold up like a little note card or a piece of paper that you've written the week and date on. So like this week, you're going to say week 2, and then whatever day that you're doing the assignment, you're going to write the date on that little piece of paper. And when you take your selfie, you just need to be holding that little note.
And why are we doing that? This is new. It's just a minute.
Yep. It's so all the evaluators had been doing things a little differently, and we had a team meeting, and that was the way that we've all decided to grade self-IDs from here on out. And the issue was because we had a frequent amount of students using the same self-ID every single week. So this just helps us clear that up really quickly, shows us that you've got your uniform on before production, and that way your evaluator doesn't have to go back to old assignments and make sure that you're not reusing an old self-ID. And we know that not everybody's was doing that, but just holding up that little card or even your fingers. So for example, week 2, this week you can put up week 2. Next week, that also works for me. But that
so
way,
do you need a date on the sanitizer too? Because that's another one.
I love to see a date on the sanitizer. I'm a little bit less of a stickler about that, but it does make me happy every time I see it.
All right. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to start talking about the cake recipe right away, and I'm going to talk kind of fast because we don't have a lot of time left. So just make sure you're listening really closely. Okay, we're making a 2-stage method cake, which is kind of like the creaming method, except instead of creaming fat and sugar, you're creaming fat and dry products. So in your recipe here, you've got flour, cocoa, salt, baking powder, baking soda. All of those things are going to get sifted together and put into your bowl. Then you've got your fat. That's going to go in the bowl with the dry ingredients. and you're going to mix them up. Right here, you see in step 3, you're gonna use a paddle attachment for 7 to 8 minutes on like medium speed, scraping often, okay? And then basically you take your liquids and your eggs and you mix them together and break them up into 2 portions, and your sugar, and you kind of add them back and forth just like the creaming method. It's called the 2-stage because technically you're adding the liquid and the sugar in 2 stages. But make sure you follow the ingredients. So you're mixing the dry ingredients for 7 to 8 minutes, okay? Then you're going to take the remaining milk and vanilla and eggs, and you're going to add that in a couple different parts. You could do 2 parts or 3 parts, however you want to do that. It's just that you're adding the ingredients slowly, alternating, just like the creaming method. Think about it like the creaming method. Instead of alternating the flour and the liquids, you're alternating the sugar and the liquids. So it's also known as the reverse creaming method. You've got flour and fat, cream it up, and then you're going to alternate the liquids and the sugar. That is the 2-stage method. And one of the benefits of the 2-stage method is that during the initial mixing process, the flour gets to be coated by the fat. So the starch molecules are coated by the fat, which helps protect it from absorbing too much moisture and developing gluten during the mixing process, because it is quite a long mixing process. So you don't want it to develop too much gluten. So the flour will get coated with the fat, and then it will not develop too much gluten. And it's going to be a fine crumb textured cake, and they're usually pretty moist too. But another thing about 2-stage method cakes is that they absorb liquids really well. So if you wanted to soak it with like a liquor or a simple syrup or something, they take that really well.
Do you guys remember another technique that you've learned where you coat the flour in your fat first before adding your liquids? Maybe biscuits, right? When we made biscuits, also our pie crust, right? Those, in both cases, we coat our flour in that fat first.
Yep. Same principle applies there. So then you have the chocolate mousse recipe, which is probably the more complicated of the assignment. You've got heavy cream and dark chocolate, of which you're going to be making a ganache out of. This part right here, you're going to be whipping it to medium peaks. And then here, you're going to be making a pat de bombe, which is basically where you combine the eggs, the yolks, the whole eggs, and the sugar, combine them over a pot of hot water until they get about 140 degrees, and you're going to whip them real well, and then fold everything together. I don't like a lot of recipes with a lot of words, which is like why I like to break it down that way. But I'm going, as soon as this class is over, I'm going to upload my version of this recipe, which is the same exact recipe. It's just written a little bit differently. It's easier to use. But that's basically the gist of it. You start by making a ganache, and you let it sit at room temperature until it cools down a little bit. You get your cream whipped to medium peaks, and you set it aside at room temperature so it doesn't get too cold. Because if it's really cold when you start folding it into everything else, it's going to cause the chocolate to seize up. And then you're going to take these egg products and the sugar, put them over some hot water. So like put a pot of water on the stove and bring it up to a simmer, turn the flame off, set your bowl over top of it, and whisk the eggs and the sugar until it reaches 140 degrees-ish. Basically what you're looking for is the sugar to be melted. So you could even stick a clean finger in there and kind of rub it. It's not going to be so hot that it burns you. It's going to be uncomfortable, but it's not going to like give you a burn or anything. And just touch the sugar and kind of rub it to see if it's dissolved. Then from there, you're going to put it in your mixer and whip it, whip it, whip it, just like a meringue. A pat de bombe is basically a meringue that's using whole eggs instead of egg whites. So let's say you're making a meringue. It's going to be kind of yellowish. You make your meringue, you fold the melted chocolate into it, and then you fold the whipped cream into it. It's that easy. Or it's that hard, depending on how complicated you want to make it. Okay. There's a video here which I will play for you somewhere. There's a bunch of videos on this page. Make sure you're definitely watching the pat de bombe chocolate mousse video, not the other one. I think this one is going to show you a cooked sugar pata bomb, which is kind of like making Italian meringue, but we're just going to do it the other way where we put it over a bain-marie. So it's like the difference between making Italian meringue and Swiss meringue. We're going to do ours a Swiss style instead.
The secret of a great chocolate mousse is in the taste and in the texture. It should be very smooth, creamy, and it should be firm enough to hold the weight of different layers of cake filling and keep its great shape in your shop for 48 hours. So what do you need to get started? Sugar, eggs, and egg yolks for the pata bomb. And our main ingredient, of course, any chocolate with a 3-drop fluid. Heat up the mixture to 60 degrees. Egg yolks and sugar, then heat up the mixture to 60 degrees.
Okay, so here they're combining the sugar in a pot. I think it's safer to use a double boiler. That way you don't scorch your eggs right away over the flame. So just set yours over a bowl of steaming water instead of right over the flame.
There we go, perfect temperature. Now pour the egg mixture straight into the stand mixer bowl and beat it at medium speed until it cools down to room temperature. And while that's happening, I'm going to bring the cream to a boil in the microwave.
You're using a microwave, but you're welcome to heat up your cream for the ganache on the stovetop if you want to.
Now let's check again on the pata bomb. As you can see, it's starting to turn into this beautifully homogeneous
Sorry, really
mixture.
to warn you guys, both in the microwave and on the stovetop, the cream can bubble over really, really quickly. So just make sure you're keeping a close eye on it. Right.
And its color is changing to white. When the cream is boiling, pour it onto the chocolate, bit by bit, and progressively melt the chocolate in it. A little bit more cream now, and I'm going to stir ganache with a stick blender.
So they're going to put a stick blender in there just to make sure it's all smooth and there's no little lumps. But if you don't have one, that's fine. Just pour it through a strainer.
And as you are mixing, it's best to keep the blade submerged to avoid air bubbles in the mixture. Since you want the temperature of the chocolate emulsion, it should range between 40 and 45 degrees centigrade to be ready for mixing with the pata bomb.
We're just looking for it to be around like a little bit hotter than room temperature. So maybe somewhere between like 80 to 90 degrees. You don't want it to be too hot because then it's going to cause your whipped cream and your pata bomb to deflate. Then you won't have a mousse. You're going to have like a fluffy chocolate sauce.
Do mind when you're making a bigger volume of chocolate mousse that the chocolate mixture has to be slightly hotter. Otherwise, it might set into tiny lumps when you're mixing it with a cooler pata bomb. And lumps in a chocolate mousse create a grainy mouthfeel, which is not what we're after. We want it lovely and smooth. It looks like my pata bomb is ready. It's nicely smooth and aerated. So now it's time to gently fold it into the chocolate mixture. The next step is to fold the chocolate pata bomb mixture into the unsweetened whipped cream. The cream should be only half whipped. Cream whipped, it would create a very hard and stiff texture of the mousse.
If you over whip your cream, you're going to have a hard time folding everything together, and you're also going to end up with lumps of cream in your mousse, which is not a good thing. So like kind of a soft to medium peak on the whipped cream is best.
There we go. A beautiful, delicious chocolate mousse, ready for your cakes or your desserts. Now you can do two things. Pour the mousse into a piping bag and apply it immediately into your cake rings or dessert glasses, and then cool them. Never cool the mousse in a piping bag before piping it, otherwise it will destroy the nicely aerated texture.
Okay, so that is a very important step they just said there. Do not cool the mousse before spreading it into your cake. I mean, if you need to set it aside for 5 or 10 minutes, that's fine, but you want to use it when it's still like soft and kind of liquidy, because if you let it set up, it's not going to be spreadable anymore. It's going to be scoopable, almost like ice cream, but you won't be able to spread it into your cake and get a nice smooth texture. So you could assemble your cake inside of the cake pan. Like if you trim your cake layers to be slightly smaller than the diameter of the cake pan, you could go ahead and throw your cake in there and then top it with mousse. That way the mousse would fall a little bit over the side of the cake and give you that crumb coat that we were looking for, and then put your next layer on. of cake and then put some more mousse on top, and then the mousse will spread out and go over the edges of the cake, and it'll give you a nice cake that's kind of like enclosed with mousse. It's filled with mousse and it's enclosed with mousse, if that makes sense. I kind of drew a picture on this app called Whiteboard, which I will show you in just a second as soon as I can get it off of my screen, because it's kind of blocking everything right now and I can't see what I'm doing. Maybe I can't do that, but I'll try to do that. Rachel has a question. Yes.
Okay, so if I could, Jeff, just get a couple clarifications. So in other classes, we've kind of covered a technique and we've been able to use recipes and flavors that we choose. So is that the case with this too? Or are you saying, because you're going through the recipes pretty specifically, so like, do we have to do those exact things, or do we just have to have a 2-stage cake with 2 layers with a mousse covered in the glaze?
You need to have some kind of 2-stage cake. It doesn't have to be this particular recipe. I would stick with the mousse recipe, but basically what we're looking for is for you to create a mousse with the pat a bomb technique. So if it's not going to be this recipe, it's got to be some kind of mousse recipe utilizing the pat a bomb technique. I would keep it simple and just stick with this recipe for now, because I don't believe that's a technique that you've ever done before. But as far as the cake goes, you can use any kind of 2-stage cake that you find. Just make sure that the ratio is right so that you get the right amount in your pans. Like I said before, I used, for an 8-inch cake yesterday, I used 16 ounces per pan to get a good layer. So that's probably, so you want to figure out how much the cake yields and then kind of divide by how many pans you have. Does that make sense?
It does. So that leads me to another question. So, well, actually 2 questions. So we can't use a gelatin-based mousse then, is what you're saying?
I mean, you could put gelatin in it at the end, but it's supposed to be pat a bomb based.
Okay.
But
and
if
then
you had like a mousse that was based on pat a bomb, but it just was kind of like loose or something, you could add some gelatin, but it's got to be the pat a bomb technique.
Okay, awesome. And then my last question is, so you're talking about, having these 2 cakes. Is it okay to do mini cakes as long as they're meeting the requirements of the 2 layers and things like that? Like if I did like my cake in the sheet pan and I cut out, like I have molds for smaller cakes, as long as I'm hitting the layers and the requirements of what the cake is and the pat a bomb and the glaze, is that okay rather than doing one big cake?
Yeah, you can split it up. Like if you baked a cake in a sheet pan, for example, you could cut it to size. Here's the diagram that I made for you where you can see that the cake is inside of the mousse if you build it in your pan that way.
Okay.
Yeah, you could make like a sheet pan and cut out circles of cake and then assemble it in the pan if you wanted to do it that way.
Okay, so that I can do smaller instead of doing like one huge 8-inch, I can do something smaller in a mold if I have the mold.
Yeah.
Here's what I'll tell you too, Rachel, though, is that glazing a large cake is pretty different than glazing a small, like petit four. Like glazing a small thing can be a lot easier. It doesn't require too much. Glazing a larger cake takes a little bit more finesse. So it might be something you consider just so that you get that practice.
I agree. But above everything else, just make sure you're utilizing the techniques. I mean, if you want to make it difficult on yourself by making it a particular size, I mean, it's up to you as long as you're showing us the techniques.
And do we have to do dark chocolate, or can we do white chocolate on that neck for the mousse?
You cannot substitute white chocolate in that particular recipe. You would have to find a separate recipe that's white chocolate based and a pat a bomb, because the amount of fat that's in white chocolate versus dark chocolate is like really different. White chocolate is pretty much all cocoa butter, whereas dark chocolate might be about 25% cocoa butter, something like that. So you're going to end up with a super liquidy mousse if you use white chocolate. Same goes with milk chocolate. You need to use a dark chocolate for this particular recipe.
And then
So what about the cake? Can I do, instead of do chocolate cake, can I do a yellow cake? I don't like chocolate cake.
as long as you're using the two-stage recipe, and there's going to be more than one recipe in your book. Like if you go into the chapter on cakes and you look up that particular method, I'm sure there's going to be 2 or 3 recipes to follow that are
Okay.
not chocolate. So you can look in your book. Just make sure you're making the right yield for the size of cake that you're trying to make. Don't make like a
Okay.
giant recipe if you want a 6-inch cake, vice versa. Don't make a recipe that yields only a small amount if you're trying to make a bigger cake.
Okay. All right. I
And
just
then
feel like it's too much chocolate.
Yeah.
Carol Brown has had her hand raised for some time. Carol, do you have a question for us?
No, I did have one, but it surpassed. It was way long ago, so no.
Did
Well,
we answer it for you?
I'm sorry?
Did we get it answered for you in our discussion?
No, but I was at work and listening in because I was trying to answer a question that was, get an answer to a question that was asked. It's okay. It'll probably come back to me.
Okay. Chef Gina's here. We haven't gotten a chance to talk about the mirror glaze yet, but I can stay longer if Chef Gina wants to jump in to talk about the externship. And then I'll hang out for a little while to discuss the mirror glaze. And I will also be present in the extra session on Friday at 7:30 p.m. Central Time to continue talking about whatever questions you have. I'll probably also make a second video to upload today about the mirror glaze just because we ran out of time. Okay. Chef Gina.
Hi. Yeah, I can make it snappy. I just wanted to come in and say hi to everyone and introduce myself. I'm Gina Donovan, and I'll be your externship instructor next term. So just about 5 more weeks, right? This is a 6-week class. So after this, you'll go into externship. So I just wanted to say hello. I have a quick little presentation. Mostly it's just contact information, what's expected this term, what's expected next term, and we will be going over all the details in great length on the first day of class on, September 30th. So I will share my screen briefly and start with who I am. So I'm your externship instructor, Chef Gina. You can reach me at chefdonovan@escoffier.edu. You can call or text this number, 805-364-2260. I can even put it into the chat, but really you can find me through the class. Chef Steve Brown, he is our externship evaluator. The 2 of us will be guiding you through the 6 weeks of externship. So we can answer any questions you have outside of this class by text or email, or you can call us. You should be working with your career services rep at this point, and they will be helping you find and locate a site if you haven't already done so. They are a great resource. They can help you with fixing your resume. They can help you with finding leads. They can even help you with mock interviews and what to expect, making site visits. We have 2 really great career services reps that specialize in pastry arts. I'm going to just make this the presentation mode. That's us. Again, I'm at 805-364-2260. Please, if you text or if you call, leave a message so I know who you are, your phone number, and I will get back to you within the day, either that day or the next morning. And so some key points. You must take and complete and pass externship in order for you to graduate from the program. So you finish all of your practical courses, your core courses. You are scheduled for externship. It's a scheduled class, so you're scheduled right after this term once you pass this class. And it's a 6-week class. So you will check in just like you do here. It is for 6 weeks. So it's not just about getting in hours whenever you get a site. It's about getting your site, getting your paperwork in, and starting your hours and accruing those hours come September 30th. So they start counting at the start of the scheduled class, which is next term. Before you even start, and you'll probably know this by now because you probably have your career services reps calling you on this, but in your class right now, under week 2, there's a little externship check-in area. There's an externship agreement and a site agreement. If you could just click those links, upload those documents, print them out. One page is for you to fill out. It's the student page. The other 2 pages are for your site supervisor to sign off on. If you don't have a site right now, it's not a time to panic. There's still time. That's why I'm here week 2. But it really is something that you want to take care of sooner rather than later. Now is the time you start the conversation with your career services rep. You start finding sites, and you start trying to, you'll get a few no's probably, but now's the time that you want to start working toward those yeses and getting those documents in. If you've had a site for a long time, you might have turned in your documents already, or now's the time to get your documents in. You can upload them into the class and we'll grab them there. Please contact me to discuss any kind of assistance. In your class, there's a place to upload documents. If you want to just shoot us a message of where you are in the process, working with your career services rep, been on several interviews, waiting for an answer, waiting for the chef to sign the documents, whatever it is, any kind of update would be helpful. So your class begins at directly after this class, so September 30th. You're required to work a total of 150 hours over the 6-week period, so that's 25 hours per week. You are not required to work 25 hours per week. This is the hospitality industry, so you might have more hours, less hours, but as long as you get to that 150-hour point. And it's really important during externship, before externship, that you keep in contact and you communicate with myself or Chef Steve about where you are in the process. You have a low amount of hours in the front end because they're just opening. The bakery is just opening, and so it's taking time to get on the schedule, but the last 3 weeks, you'll have plenty of hours. Or you have a ton of hours the first half, and then you'll have less hours the last few weeks. Any of that works, but as long as we know where you are with it. Hours worked outside of the course timeline. So if you've been working all this time, hours toward externship won't count until you're scheduled in the class September 30th. And we would like all your secured, if you secured a site, you have a site that you'll be working at, we'd like the paperwork in now. If you don't have a site, you can't turn in the paperwork, so keep working toward that. Let us know where you are. Let us know what kind of help you need. Career services are there to help you with that. Chef Steve and I can help you with that. But you must have the paperwork in and signed before the class starts for externship. And here is the paperwork. So we have 2 documents. One's called a site agreement. This is an agreement between us, the school, and your site, the employer. It's just basically stating that they're willing to host externs, that they know that they're hosting students, that they're getting school credit, that they need 150 hours. This can be a paid or unpaid opportunity, so they would just check one of these boxes with the name of the business, all the contact information, which is really important. This helps us verify that the site and get it approved. And then the supervisor just prints and signs their name. And it's just them. It's just who the site is. Yes, they're willing to host Escoffier externs. And you know, you're in the pastry arts program, but depending on what the site is, if it's a hotel or a restaurant, they can check that they host both culinary and pastry students. So that's that agreement. Then we have the externship agreement. It's a 2-page document. First page is all about you. You're in class. The course start date, September 30th. You'll put right here when the course starts, your name, pastry arts program, your address, phone number, all of that, what you agreed to. So you're going to comply to the site's policies. You're going to follow, you know, all of their policies. You're going to work the required hours, the 150 hours. You're going to turn weekly timesheets in every week. You're going to contact career services to get the documents in, all of those things that you agree to. You sign and date it, and then the next page goes right back to the supervisor. It's very similar to the page they signed before, which was an agreement between us and them. This is an agreement between you and them. So they're agreeing to provide training, provide guidance and direction. We'll work on developing your skills. They're going to provide 150 hours over the 6 weeks. They're going to sign weekly timesheets, all of that. They signed, they date, and right down here is an additional proxy. Anybody in addition to the main supervisor that can sign off on your hours. So these documents are really important to get into externship, because whoever whatever this business is, whoever this site supervisor is, that's what we verify. We make sure you're working with this position, make sure this position is pastry oriented. You're gonna click the pastry box. Your start date, so if you started 2 years ago, that date would be, if you're starting October 10th, that date would go there, whether it's a paid or unpaid opportunity. We verify all this and get it approved before you start externship. And then once you're on externship, you'll have an electronic timesheet, and this supervisor who signed it will be the supervisor that can authorize your hours every week. And that's why we allow one more line for an additional person. And once you get in the class, we have another proxy form, so you can start adding more people as long as it's approved by your main supervisor, multiple people to sign off on your weekly hours. So the proxy form will be in the class available to you. The class becomes available on the first day. And the electronic timesheet is something that becomes available to you after the first day, once you get started and we see that all your paperwork is in. So even if you turned your paperwork in, say now, last week, once the class starts, we go in and give access to the electronic timesheet to each student that has what they need, as long as that's the way that they're submitting their weekly hours. And then you just log on on your phone, on your Chromebook, on your tablet, chef's office computer, and you log in. We'll give you login information when the class starts, and we'll have a live session about all of that at the end of the week. So you work all of your weekly hours, you put them in at the end of the week, and you hand over your phone to your supervisor. They sign it electronically, you hit that submit button, and your weekly assignment is done. So externship has a couple of things. We have 2 live sessions, we have 2 discussions, but mostly it's about getting into a kitchen, into a site, learning, growing, developing, and honing your skills. And that's what we're going to be guiding you through, making sure all your documentation showing that you're honing those skills is correct and in and signed by the right person, and your weekly hours are in every week, which are your attendance, turning in your hours every week. So again, hours equals attendance. You turn in hours at the end of every week. That's your weekly attendance. Our weeks will run, I think for that term, we're going to be running Monday through Sunday. So your weekly hours will be turned in Sunday, but on the first live session, I'll go over that again. But your weekly hours are due all at once at the end of the week. And this is a career services map. If you're on this side in this like light purple color, you have Annette Martinez-Smith, who will help you. She's at 909-248-4390. And then we have Virginia on the East Coast, and she's at 810-545-7882. I can give you all this information. You probably have it. You probably have an email from them. If you ever need career services, the easiest thing to do is email this, careerservices@escoffier.edu. Really easy email. Let them know who you are, when you're starting externship, or what your question is. When do I start externship, and who's my career services rep? Any question you have, they'll be back to you right away and can help you with anything you need for getting started with externship at this point. Then once you're in externship, Chef Steve and I will guide you through those 6 weeks. I think that's it. That's my contact information. I'll stop sharing and see if you have any questions. I know your class is ending and you still have other things to talk about. So I really encourage you to call or text me, and I can help you with externship if you have questions that didn't get answered today. And so that's that. Are there questions that came up in the chat that I can help you with?
Nope, I just retyped your information. So if you guys didn't see Chef Gina's info on the screen, it's also typed down in our chat.
Thank you, Chef. So if you have any questions, please reach out to me. I'm so happy I was able to come in here today and meet you all and see you all, so you know who I am. You can reach out to me. I'll answer your questions, and I look forward to seeing you next term. Thanks for your time, Chef.
Thanks for coming.
Take care. Bye.
All right. Well, class is technically over in just a couple minutes, but I'm going to continue talking. So if you need to leave, go ahead. Just make sure you look at the archive last 10 or 15 minutes of my recording to pick up anything that you missed. I'm going to talk about the glaze recipes. I'm going to play a YouTube video on how to glaze a cake, and then we will talk about how to make the mirror glaze real quick. Okay. So they've already created their mirror glaze, which we'll talk about next, but I just want to show you how to pour it on the cake. You'll notice that they have a pan here to collect everything that falls off of the cake, which you will have. So you want to set down a pan or at least a giant piece of parchment paper to collect the drippings. This is a can, looks like a can of like vegetables or soup or something. That's going to hold your cake up off of the table so that when the glaze pours down, it's not like pooling around the bottom of your cake. It's just like dumping off the sides of your cake. They've got a handy silicone cake pan that they just pulled off of there. I don't know if anybody has one of those, but those are fun to use when you're baking mousse cakes. This cake is frozen solid, by the way. You're going to dump a good bit of glaze on there, and then the glaze is just kind of naturally go across the top of the cake and work its way down the sides. After you're done dumping the glaze on there, you can pick up the pan and kind of like move it around a little bit to move the glaze. But I will mention that you want to work as quickly as possible with mirror glaze because it's got gelatin in it and you're dumping it onto a very, very cold cake. So it's going to set up like super fast. So there's no time to mess around with this cake. Once you're done dumping the glaze on there, you want to let it sit for a few minutes to set up, and then just like they did a second ago, you're going to trim off the little drippings with like a paring knife or a spatula. But the most important thing to know about glazing cakes like that is that you have to use the glaze when it's a certain temperature. If it's too hot, not only is it going to start to melt your mousse, but it's also going to very thinly coat your cake, and you're going to be able to basically see right through the cake. So you've got to make sure that the glaze, whether it's ganache or mirror glaze, is around like 90 to 95 degrees, maybe right in between there, 92, 93. No hotter than that. And then of course, if it's colder than that, it's going to be really thick and like goopy, and you won't be able to get it spread over your cake very nicely. So the reason why I talk about ganache instead of mirror glaze is because mirror glaze is kind of an advanced technique, especially if you've never enrobed a cake before. And I went through some of the previous classes and I looked at the assignment submissions, and they didn't look too good with mirror glaze on it. So I wanted to kind of set you up for success in that I want to give you an option of something that's a little bit easier and it might work better for you than mirror glaze. But I will go into the mirror glaze recipe and talk about that real quick. And then there's kind of like a little video slideshow on how it's prepared. Otherwise, you can just make your ganache. Heat your cream to scalding, dump it over the chocolate, whisk it, whisk it, whisk it till it's smooth, dump it through a strainer, and then cool it down to about 92 degrees, and then it's ready to use. You can make your ganache or your mirror glaze ahead of time. Like you can make them today and put them in the refrigerator for a few days until you're ready to use it, and then just microwave it gently to warm it back up. Okay, you can make your cake ahead of time and put it in the freezer. The mousse needs to be made after the cake is made. So don't try to make the cake make the mousse first and then make the cake. You've got to at least bake the cake and get it cooled before you make your mousse. I just kind of want to mention that in case you're trying to, divide up your week. But I'll go ahead and show you the mirror glaze recipe now. Under your assignments, you've got the mirror glaze recipe. And there's a lot of words, lots and lots of words here, but I'm going to break it down real simple for you. Bloom your gelatin in cold water. You basically have a bowl of cold water, sprinkle your gelatin over it, shake it a little bit, maybe stir it up a little bit, let it sit for about 5 minutes. It should look like applesauce. There should not be any unbloomed parts of gelatin in there. You'll be able to tell because it's going to look lumpy. You don't want it to look lumpy. You want it to look like smooth, perfectly uniform in color, kind of like a creamy yellowish color. Then you're going to take your next set of ingredients right here, and you're going to heat them up until it's nice and hot. I don't know if there's a temperature in here somewhere. A gentle simmer. So you're going to heat it to a gentle simmer. Then you're going to stir in the bloom gelatin. So you've got these 4 ingredients heated to a gentle simmer. Stir it a little bit till the sugar melts. Bring it to a gentle simmer. Stir in your gelatin. Then you're going to dump it over the chocolate, just like you're making ganache right here. Pour it over the white chocolate mixture. Stir it gently. I would use a whisk for that. If you've got a stick blender, you can put it in there. Just try not to incorporate any bubbles. Stir it till all the chocolate is melted and mixed in smoothly like ganache. And then from there, it's like a whitish, kind of pale yellow glaze because of the white chocolate. It kind of tints it a little bit yellow. If you want to put food coloring in there, just let it cool down slightly, and then you could add whatever color you want. I like to start by adding some white food coloring just to make it a pure white color instead of yellowish. And then you can make it, you know, pink or green or whatever color you want to use. And then you just need to use the glaze when it's 92 degrees. You can make it ahead of time, like I said, and store it in the refrigerator. Otherwise, you can make it right before it's time to glaze the cake. Just make sure it's the right temperature before you pour it on the cake.
For the full color. Yes, the full color. Does it have to be gel, or it can be the other one?
I would use gel for pretty much all pastry applications.
Okay.
I definitely would not use powdered color in this recipe, but if you had liquid and that was the only coloring you had, you could use it. Just don't add too much because you don't want to be like adding a bunch of liquid to the glaze.
And a tip for both your ganache and your glaze, whichever one you choose, when you pour your scalded liquid, your simmering liquid over your chocolate, let it sit for about a minute or two before you start to stir it. You want to let that hot chocolate get or that hot cream or hot liquid get a head start at melting your chocolate. It's going to be much easier to get a smooth consistency. It can be hard to resist sometimes. Sometimes you just want to get right in there and stir. But if you let that hot liquid melt your chocolate for a few minutes before you start stirring, you'll have a much easier time.
Very good point. Excellent point. Okay, next up I just have the slideshow on how to make the mirror glaze. Like I said before, mirror glaze can be any color you want to make it, unless you just want to leave it that whitish, yellowish color. This is a link that's in the class page, by the way, by all the other videos under week 2, so you can look at it again. This talks about the ingredients we just went over. Any sort of special equipment you might need. Strainer is good to have, gelatin, gel colors, stick blender, scale, of course, white chocolate, whatever it is you need for this thing. And then you're going to bloom the gelatin by sprinkling the gelatin over the cold water and stirring it up a little bit, and then let it sit for a few minutes. That's an important part of blooming gelatin, is you let it sit for a few minutes until it fully blooms, gels. It's going to puff up, it's going to kind of get thick. And then you're going to combine the next ingredients into the pot, bring it to a simmer, add your gelatin. Okay, so just heat everything up, add the gelatin, and then you're going to dump it over the chocolate, which is what's happening in this video, in this window here. They're pouring it through a strainer just to make sure there's no chunks of anything in the liquid, and then they're making the white chocolate ganache. So essentially it's kind of like a gelatinized white chocolate ganache, which is using sweetened condensed milk instead of heavy cream. And then you can add color if you want to do that. So
the other thing I want to tell you guys about this glaze is when you see cakes that have that swirled effect, or a mirror glaze with that swirled effect, one of the ways that's achieved is by having smaller cups with different colors in it. So you pour your white glaze over the top, and then let's say you have a little Dixie cup with like pink in it. You can pour that pink over the top, use your spatula to spread it where you want to. If you want to do that with another color, you can again pour a little more glaze. It's going to melt into the existing glaze that's on the cake, and that's one of the ways that you can achieve that multicolored swirled galaxy effect.
And of course, if you do that, you will be working at lightning speed. Don't dump the pink glaze on the cake and then turn around and 2 minutes later come back with the white glaze, because it won't work that way. You've got to dump first color, dump the second color, spread it out, and don't touch it again because it's got gelatin. It's going to set up. It's going to be all gummy, and you know, you got to really work fast. And when I'm talking fast, I mean like uncomfortably fast. Like if we were in the kitchen together, I would be kind of yelling at you, go, 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 which I do in the kitchen, but you know, like uncomfortably fast, as fast as you can like humanly possibly go.
Rachel, do you have a question?
Always. So is there a benefit to doing the way that you were just talking about with multiple cups, or pouring like the basin and then pouring all the colors in together and letting them, do you know what I'm talking about? Like you have like the white and then you pour a little bit of pink in the same container and a little bit of purple and then pour it at the same time. Is there a benefit or difference between the two techniques?
If you mix it all up together, you're going to have a more random like kind of like mixture of colors happening on your cake. If you've got a specific design in mind, let's say you want your cake to be bright red with just like a streak of bright green or like across it, then you have to, you know, use your glaze where it's in like two different containers. But if you want more of like a random flow, now personally, as far as like it goes in the bakery, I don't like to mix my mirror glaze together because at the end you end up with a really weird color that's down in the bottom of the pan that it's kind of difficult to reuse. Like if you've got white and green and pink and purple all mixed together, it's going to look fabulous on that particular cake, but the waste that's left over, it's going to be less likely that you're able to use that because of all the colors mixed together kind of make like a brownish purple color. Whereas if you have your mirror glaze in different colors and different containers, you can kind of decide where it goes. And then at the end, you still have containers full of mirror glaze and you just have a little bit of waste that may or may not be usable. Save some money. What else? Anything else? I don't want to discourage you from using mirror glaze because it's super fun and it's also very trendy and it's something that you should learn how to use. But if this is your first time enrobing a cake, you might want to go with the ganache first. Or maybe you do like Rachel said earlier, make your cake in like a sheet or something, and maybe you could make two cakes. You could make two smaller like 6-inch mousse cakes. You could do one with regular chocolate ganache and one with mirror glaze, just so you have something at the end to show. Because I would hate if you used all your resources just to make one or the other and you know, you messed it up. Because like I said, mirror glaze is a more advanced technique. I'm not even particularly comfortable working with it that often. I like ganache. But mirror glaze also has that gelatin in it too, so it's gonna kind of have a gummy quality when you slice the cake. It's gonna be like, almost like the cake is covered in a layer of Jell-O, which may or may not be what you're looking for, but it is very beautiful too. Any other questions? Any questions down in the chat room? I can't find my chat room, I don't know.
Doesn't look like we have any questions down there so far, but I do want to remind you guys one more time to please share your work in our class cafe, so that way we can all learn and inspire each other, learn from and inspire.
Yeah, do that. I like to look at your stuff, especially like before you submit the assignment. If you know you have questions or something, you put it in there, send it to us so we can see what you're working on. You can even send recordings to me, like if you want to record something and send it to my email or something, you can do that just in case. And like I said before, I'm pretty much always around. I don't leave my house very often. I don't have a very eventful life, so I'm available to chat with you guys more often than not. So please reach out if you need to. The extra session is going to be on Friday at 7:30. I hope to see some of you there. Bring your questions. Okay, anything else? Awesome. Well, anyway, maybe I'll see you on Friday, maybe not, but good luck with everything. Please let us know if you need any help. And otherwise, thanks for coming today. Thanks for all your questions and, you know, chatting with us. And we will talk to you later. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.